Okay, welcome back. So, for today's topic, Josh and I are going to break down the importance of self reliance and why it is so foundational and fundamental for particularly men to develop and to understand the real meaning of what it means to be a self reliant individual. Um, Josh, when we were talking about topics, we get together every other week or so to plan out topics that we want to cover. And this was something that you had kind of alluded to and we landed on. And I believe it was around kind of some of our current culture and some of the things that we're seeing right now. But I wanted to first kick it over to you to find out really where that really came from for you personally, and what inspired the idea for us to talk about that today.
Yeah, I think it comes from just how things are in our culture today. There's a lot of people who don't feel that they need to put in the work to get what they want. They feel that they shouldn't have to feel pain or stress, or the sting of loss or disappointment. And loss, I don't mean like loss of a loved one. I mean like you had a goal or a competition and you failed or lost at that. I think for me personally, it kind of goes back to when, again, we have that kind of coming of age from boys into men. And even it can happen again as we're men where we kind of realize like, I got to do this on my own, right? There's nobody else that can do this for me. I think I really grew into that probably in my early 20s. When you just I was just kind of floating through, not really, no direction, not really much to do. Got involved in personal training and would always have I think we've talked about this in the past, and good experiences with some of the doctors that I worked with, and they were like, oh, you had a real interest in kind of what I do in medicine, you should look into getting into it, right? And I'm like, I'm a little too old, I'm 23, I ain't got time for that, right?
Yeah, stupid,
yeah. Again, as men, our brains don't develop until we're 25, I was 2 years short of that. So then I kind of went through that and processed that, and then eventually kind of got to a point in my life where I was like, I'm not enjoying what's going on. I hate the lack of control that I have, which is another issue of my own at that time, but it was like, I got to do something about this. And so that's when I went to school. And then I realized like, I'm the only one who's going to take these tests. I'm the only one who's going to pass or fail these classes. And I failed a couple tests, and that was a motivator, right? Again, that pain and that disappointment of that, like, I know I didn't put my best foot forward, so go back to the drawing board, reassess, and I don't want to feel that way again, so I'm not going to feel that way again, right? And just through my educational process and the trials and tribulations and how hard that is, I couldn't rely on my wife to do it for me, I couldn't rely on my friends to do it for me, I couldn't rely on anybody but me. And I had to be disciplined with my studies. I had to be disciplined with getting to class and paying attention and finding areas that I needed help in and recognizing my own weaknesses to make them strengths. And that was a time-intensive process, and it was hard, right? But on the back end of it, when I got done, it was like, I learned that if I can do that as an adult with kids and go through undergraduate and graduate school, there's really not a whole lot I can't do. And I think that's probably the most valuable thing I took from that. But people don't want to go through that struggle and that pain and that stress to come out on the other side and be like, wow, that was pretty awesome. If I can do that, what's stopping me from doing whatever I want, right? And that's not an egotistical thing. I think that's you've built the calluses of life to know that you can endure. And I think the current culture and the coddling of especially college age and high school age kids does not promote that. Avoid struggle, avoid pain, avoid challenges, because that's only going to make you feel anxiety, right? Which, if we weren't supposed to feel anxiety, do you think it would be an emotion that would be elicited so frequently in certain situations? No, it's built in. It's there. It's a protection. But then there's also ways that we can desensitize that emotion and realize that we're safe, even though it hurts a little bit. But people, it's hard for me to wrap my mind around why people don't want to experience that little bit of discomfort, because you don't grow if you're comfortable all the time. And so I think, just as we kind of talked about what we were going to discuss, I think that's one of the things that I think people need to hear, that if you just do a little bit of introspection and retrospective evaluation of your life, you're probably way stronger and more able to do things than you think.
Yeah, and accountability is that's almost a precursor to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would imagine that, and we've learned that having been without a stable father, or having been without a stable father figure in your own life, that was probably something that was maybe more challenging for you than would be for somebody who had a dad around, or who didn't have to learn those things in that way. Me personally, I learned it in really two different ways. One was from my own pop. Him and my grandfather had a fairly contentious relationship. He moved out when he was a junior in high school. He moved out and he just basically took the van and left, right? He was living in a house with 7 sisters. So first of all, I'm lucky to be sitting here.
Yeah.
And then at one time, then my grandparents adopted 2 Vietnamese girls, so there was 9.
Ooh.
So, but there was a lot of pressure on him, and I don't want to spend the time talking about that. But he literally didn't have a pot to piss in when he was a junior in high school.
Mm.
And when I look back at the things that I saw him do, and the things that he really carved himself out of stone, and where he's at now. Of course, it's 40 some odd years later. That was obviously very very known to me, and I got to witness that firsthand. The other part was individual sports, and I would say particularly wrestling for me really baked that into my DNA. I don't know anything other than what it means to be self-reliant upon yourself. In an individual sport, and wrestling's not the only one. In an individual sport, there's nowhere to point, there's nowhere to run and hide.
Mm-hmm.
The work falls, it lands at your feet, and it rests upon your shoulders, rather to see to it that you find success, or that you reach your potential or your goals. There's nowhere to run and hide. So those are the 2 real crucial areas for me that I learned it. And I just think that as a man, I can't speak from what a female is drawn to in men, but I would think that his own moral compass, right, the things that guides his decision making, the things that are we've talked about it before, but the things that are like his true north, right? Those things are really fundamental, because as a man, you need to be a reliable person, and you can't point to other people to be able to do that for you. That's what the self-reliant is.
Yep.
You make your own judgments, you use your own faculties, you're your own individual with your own experience, and you trust in that judgment and you trust in that guidance. And as part of doing that, especially if you're a father who leads a family and you have kids of your own and you're leading your family, I hope to someday, that's paramount. There's no way of getting around that. But we live in a time where there, no competition, and everybody gets participation medals, and there's just not a lot of developed patience for working towards an endeavor over an extended period of time. The things that are just given to you or handed to you because you think that you're owed them, you don't value them for shit, because you haven't earned. There's no sweat equity there.
Yeah, because again, and we were talking about this before. It's if you don't have the pain of loss or failure, then how can you value the victory? Or if you don't have the pain of the process, how can you value the end goal? It's never going to keep you on the path, right? I think Jocko's a guy who always talks about staying on the path, right? And it's the path of your life and your goals and the things you want to attain, and how you find that path, because a lot of people don't really have a path, right?
Yeah.
They don't see okay, these are the things that I want to accomplish. There's not many people who are goal oriented. And I guess I kind of want to get one thing out of the way, a couple of things. One, we're talking about this topic not as if we're perfect. I have felt like the landmine of my life before this point is long and deep, right? I have made a lot of mistakes. I have screwed up a bunch of times. And one of the things that I always have trouble with the leadership books and the things that we read is that people don't ever explain like how this is how I failed multiple times to get to this point. And then we, as a society, we only see the microcosm of a person in the moment that we catch them, right? So you see a guy driving the Maserati, like on a rich prick, blah, blah, blah. But how do you know that guy's dad didn't die when he was 7 and his mom was poor and he just ground himself into dust to getting where he's at? And that he's not a philanthropic human being who helps others. Like, people just make these assumptions based off of the moments that we see, right? I've been guilty of that in my life. And so I don't want people to think that we're taking this high road of like we're better than everybody, because I am not. So I kind of wanted to get that out of the way so people understand that we're coming from a place of experience, and in addition to a place of where we want to kind of help people find a way to lift themselves up and push through and be self-reliant. So.
Yeah, you have to participate in your own rescue. I mean, say, Josh, you wanted to get in really good shape. I mean, is that something that you can go buy at Walgreens, or is that something that your neighbor John is going to be able to do for you? Are you going to be able to rely on John's judgment to be able to get your ass in the gym every day?
Is that fat, bro? Ain't wrong.
No, but that's how you learned it, though. That's how you learned it.
Yeah, I know that the positions that I'm in, right, are 100% the consequences of the decisions that I've made. I cannot turn around and go like, man, if it weren't for that time, I wouldn't be where I'm at. It's completely false, right? It's a lie that people perpetuate to themselves because they don't want to accept responsibility for their actions, right? And it is a, I'm not going to use the word pandemic, but it is a pestilence in our society that is running rampant. The lack of accountability, of self-accountability to say, yeah, things are the way they are because I made the decisions that I made, right? And the more that we rely on other people to do things for us, the further we fall down that hole because we never find a way out. And that's the problem with systems like welfare for full families. Like, why are you continuing to let these people rely on the government to prop them up and support them? Because they have no reason, they have no incentive to ever get out of that hole and change the legacy of their family to be better contributors to the society, to their lives, to their family. Like, there's no incentive, right? So when people sit there and say like, well, if it weren't for A, B, C, and D, it's like, what are you talking about? There's plenty of paths out. You just don't want to take.
Right, and it would be really important to just get a visual on what that looks like, which is, I'll take the handout, but it's their fault that I don't have it the way that I want.
Exactly.
Could you more remove yourself from any responsibility and accountability? Again, I'll take the handout. That's nice. I didn't have to work for that. But it's their fault that I don't have it the way that I think I should.
So I deserve it.
Right.
Which is maybe one of the phrases that triggers me the most, right? Like, people say, well, I deserve that. You don't. Nobody deserves anything, right? You earn these things. Like, that's how you get what you want. You have to earn it. I don't deserve $1 million just because, I grew up poor and I'm a minority. Like, how does that help me? How does that help me help others? It doesn't. All it does is perpetuate a cycle of greed and laziness and lack of accountability and this pretentiousness to believe that I should get what I want because of the circumstances I came from. It's garbage. It's complete garbage. And anybody who says otherwise is lying to themselves and the people that they tell it to, because they're trying to either get likes on Twitter or attention on themselves to have people think like, oh, they're a bastion of social justice when it's really not true.
It's based on resentment. If you want to know in my opinion, that's how I see it. But going back to the guy that drives a Maserati, the fact that he's driving the Maserati is also commensurate with the fact that there was risks that he took along the way, and that there were mistakes that were made, and that there was accountability that was owned, and that there were strategies to get around your where you were falling short. But again, like you said, all that is missed because the knee-jerk reaction is like, oh, this guy's got a bunch of money. Let us also not forget the fact that, yes, the Maserati is nice, but also comes with that a lot of responsibility. If he's a guy that runs a Fortune 5 or a Fortune 2 or 3 company, okay, well, he's got now hundreds of lives he has to speak to and look out for.
Yep.
So is that something that you equate with having a Maserati? Because you should. He's got people that work for him, and the people that work for him have places they want to go and families they have to look after and mouths they have to feed. That's an enormous amount of responsibility.
Yep.
So the knee-jerk reaction of like, this is why I don't have it as good as I would like it, is because of guys like that. Especially if he came from the projects, what tools did he have that you did not?
Exactly.
Or that you were without?
Yep. Yeah. And, I think, again, there are people who are like that, who are silver spoon pricks, who just don't care about his dad's company. They inherited it. They don't care about the people that work for them, right? But I would say that, especially in the smaller business world, the vast majority of those people, because you can still make really, really good money running a small, they really do care about the people that work for them. And they do they burden that responsibility of their jobs and their lives and their
And they want to mentor. They want to mentor younger people too.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's and we were talking about that before the podcast of The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek and extreme ownership, and knowing that like what you do now is a microcosm of the path that's laid in front of you, right? These moments that we do now will decide how those things go for me, for my kids and their kids and their kids, right? Can I work through all my crap that I still deal with in order to have my kids build on the legacy that we're trying to do? Because it's not going to be rainbows and sunshine, right? Like, I still got plenty of issues that I have to deal with, right? And they're going to have some issues, and hopefully we can just kind of get those issues out of our family at a certain point, generations down the road, right? And what does the Bible say is like, I can't remember how many generations it says that the curses of the father will fall on the son, and so on, right? And there's a lot of truth in that, man. It doesn't turn around in one cycle.
Yep.
It takes time to get rid of that stuff. So if we don't see it that way, you'll never fix those problems. You'll never rid your legacy or your family of those problems until you take them head on. Again, self-reliance, to take these things head on and be honest and accountable about it, and then you can change the world, man. I know that's it's a trope and it's cliche, but you really can if you're focused and you're trying to do the right things. I mean, think about some of these guys that impact millions of people. It literally shifts the direction the world is heading. It's quite amazing, and it just takes a lot of self-reliance, a lot of risk, and it just takes some balls to do those things.
You do. You have to remove your own ego from it,
Mm-hmm.
That's not a white picket fence. It's not easy to do, but it's
incredibly hard to do.
Yeah.
Anytime that you question anything, right, that's your ego kicking in.
Right.
I mean, if you look at it from a Freudian thing, anything that you think is not good enough, or my idea was better, or that's kind of stupid, or I don't like, that's your ego is constantly pulling at you to tell you that, like, yeah, you're right. Everything that you know is right, and you can do whatever you want because you're right. And to humble that is really, really, that's a practice, right? That's not just something that we can do. That takes time and practice and being around other people who are humble and they're open to understand that, like, it's just maybe a little bit of ego there, and we're not gonna react on that, right? It takes other people humbling their egos around you for that to be really successful. But I think you breed that within a team, or you breed that within a company or an organization or a family. And it's hard, man. People don't understand how hard that is. It's really hard to be like, because Jocko always says is whenever I get in a disagreement with somebody, I'm always going to talk about that guy. I think he's an amazing human being from top to bottom. I mean, like, if you listen to him, there's very few things that's questionable. He always says, when I get in a disagreement with somebody, I want to find out how they're right. I want them to prove me wrong and to prove themselves right. Because then it's like, okay, perfect. I have subdued my ego. And then it allows that person to be autonomous within their ideas and to be able to express themselves and to have conversation and conflict resolution. And then you get to work together as a team. And I think there's a lot of value in that, because people don't want to do that. They just want to be, well, I'm right. We're not going to listen to what you have to say, and we're just going to plow ahead with my idea. Nobody ever wants to be wrong, but I think there's a lot of value in being wrong. Again, right? You're wrong. You find out why you're wrong, and then you can be better.
Yeah, that goes back to the whole, we're not going to keep score. There's no such thing as good competition. It's like, okay, Well, if we're not learning those things on the soccer fields when we're 5, 6, and 8, 9, how do we expect to just show up in a Fortune 500 company or at our jobs a 9 to 5 and expect to just manifest that ability to work with others and to hear others out and to commiserate together to work as a unit towards a higher goal or a higher purpose that really you're contributing to, but it's not solely you that is getting there, and it's not solely your decision. I don't mean you, but it's not the individual's decision to get there. You're a cog in a piece, and you're an instrumental piece. I think that if people read too far into the idea, you brought up the infinite game. We talked a little bit about this, that it could be. I think it would be easy for people to fall into a nihilistic place where it's like, well, why even try? What does it even mean? What does it even matter?
Yeah, if anybody hasn't read that book, he basically talks about that it's business or wherever you work, if you're involved in that, there's no finish line. And it was there before you. After you leave, it's going to continue on. So get it out of your head that you think that there's always going to be this place where you can get there and be like, all right, we won. That's it, right? It's not the case, and it's a hard concept to wrap your mind around. It
is because it's all you're supposed to grind and you're supposed to get it, and you're supposed to be goal oriented and you're supposed to achieve. I think that Jordan Peterson says this quite often, where it's that's nihilism is what drove the Columbine shooting, and that's a really horrific event. I mean, it was horrific, but if you take the time to understand the motivation behind it, which was that they were prone to nihilism, which is what's it all mean and what is this all for, and that we're kind of a waste of space as humans.
Yep.
Well, that's
nothing. I find no value
exactly.
in anything. Then there's no value in human life, and that's not nihilism. But I think you can see that how it can get to that point.
Exactly.
They get to the point with this case.
Yeah, that's an extreme, there's no end to that really either. Like, how far can that really go before that's going to turn into a disaster right away. I think that you and I come to the same camp in terms of, okay, well, yes, you may not get to, if it's an infinite game, and that is maybe somewhat disappointing in some sense, you would be better off if you pitched in, carried a load, took on some responsibility, and pitched in and took care of your own shit, rather than to assign blame or to assign guilt or to assign some sort of oppression narrative around your experience. It does nobody any good.
Yep.
And how reliable and strong are you ethically and morally as a person? If that's your presupposition, it's like, okay, well, if it's not worth discussing, you came into this world as an individual, and that's how you'll leave. Mm-hmm. And throughout the 19th century, what did we do as individuals? I mean, part of what we're all living in today is a manifestation of people who did exactly that they all collectively pitched in, and they carried a load, and they spoke their truth, and that they relied upon themselves, and that they were dependable people.
Yep.
So that way, not only for themselves, but for their families, for their communities, and for the broader communities that we're all living in today.
Yeah, I think if you look, that's a great point, right? And the reason why that was the way it was then, they didn't have a choice, right? It was like survival. And there's these high watermarks in our history as a country where people came together to push through these terrible times. World War I, the Great Depression, World War II. Vietnam is a little bit of a different one because that was, kind of an unnecessary war. And then the one that we have completely just cratered on was coronavirus. We had a great opportunity to come together as a nation against an invisible enemy that didn't care who you were, where you came from, what color your skin was. And we let that divide us. And we let that break down our society almost to the point of, it's still, we're kind of in the middle of it where we can go sideways pretty quickly. And I think it's going to have long-term ramifications where people didn't put their opinions and their emotions and their ego aside to lift up the greater good, right? They chose masks to divide people, now it's vaccines to divide people, now it's your political stance to divide people, now it's Afghanistan, right? Like, you had these very political things, and now we have a really big issue on our hands. And the infinite game of our terrible leadership, right? Because this is the infinite game pinpoints to a leadership thing, is where they only think about what they're doing right now because they don't care what's going to happen in 5 years. And that's the problem. That's where, if you had an infinite game in our governmental leadership, it would look completely different. But we're not doing that. And I think there's a trickle-down effect of that, where if that were something that we could implement in all areas, they would just operate much differently. They would contribute, they would lock arms with people regardless of their beliefs, and they would find common ground of agreement to get past the stuff that's really kind of manufactured to make people pissed off in order to get more YouTube and Twitter clicks and all this crap and get things done. Because if we don't handle this correctly, we could have some pretty disastrous stuff. I know we kind of went off the rails there and got political, but I think there's still implications of how, if you can see, that's a great example of a failure of leadership, and how that working in the moment and not playing a long game can really tear a society apart. The fabric of it. And you can use that as good examples in your life and in your leadership and so on and so forth in order to avoid those problems, I think. Because it's actively happening. Just turn your TV on, right? Our leaders of the country just bitch back and forth at each other about the dumbest things that are inconsequential in reality, and now that there's a big problem, they don't know how to handle it.
Yeah, people are home all day and they're watching news, so it's just an inflammatory news feed.
But it's a sign of leaders who contribute nothing, right? Like, what do our senators and what do our politicians, what do they actually do for you as a person and as a citizen? Like, can you think of anything that anybody in government has done for you, Aaron?
No.
So why do we rely on them? So that's my point. Like, this gets back to the self-reliance. They've done nothing for people, yet people honestly believe that they're going to make a difference in their life. When the only person who can is you. And if you circle back to our tribe podcast, your tribe, the people that you put your trust in, that are going to hold you accountable, that you can hold accountable, why are we relying on these people who don't care about us to make our lives better? Again, it's a lack of self-reliance. When we can rely on ourselves to do better, to be better, to make better decisions, to better our lives, and those are the lives that around us, the ones that we love and we care about.
Yeah, it's incumbent upon every individual.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say it's probably even maybe a little bit more incumbent upon every man. I mean, that's in my bio for this show.
Mm-hmm.
Is that I feel like it's incumbent upon every man to find out what that is for himself.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever idiosyncratic way that is for you, all the better. Because that manifests itself in various ways that we all get to benefit from. But the avoidance of conflict, and it's all about the segment or the group or the collection that you're a part of. And it's like, okay, well, one of the best books I've ever read. Have you ever read the first and second essays by Ralph Waldo Emerson?
No.
It's very good. It's very good. It was written, I believe, in like late 1800s, I believe. But it's only about 20 pages long, and it talks about self-reliance. And it's that you were born into this world with everything that you need. And of course now it's like, okay, well, there's so much distraction, there's so many different influences and so many different things that, you can get pulled in different directions. And you don't need that. You don't need as many things as you think that you do, because you have all the faculties, you were born with them.
Mm-hmm. And you're constantly told that you don't.
Right, and people are always running from it.
Mm-hmm.
Because they have to attend to some sort of like group or some sort of other validating external setup or arrangement that confirms their belief or that confirms their doubts.
And so do you know why groupthink and cancel culture is so powerful?
Because it does not facilitate conversation.
Well, no, but I mean, why it's so influential and so powerful for people to want to be involved in, like the groupthink, and then why cancel culture has such a strong, why it works so well. So groupthink and being in the in group, right, is because we're social creatures. And so if you find people that you think agree with you or that you hold up to a high standard, if they include you in the group, it fires like every pleasure center of your brain.
Mm.
But when you take somebody and you cancel them or remove them from that group, it's so mentally devastating to people that it will trip a cycle of anxiety and depression that will, if unchecked, could potentially lead to something like suicide or self-harm. Because you have been removed from your social circle. It's like when they kick the lion out of the pride, right?
Yeah, you're ostracized.
They basically wander, they starve, and then they die.
Right.
Because they cannot figure out how to function within that group mentality. They don't know how to work outside of that. The problem with our society is we've set up all these different groups that you can kind of move from one to one, which then creates an identity crisis. And then once you kind of get ostracized from those, then you've lost your sense of self-worth and who you are, right? So somebody who was like, oh yeah, man, I really like fantasy football, and you kind of just bounce around, next thing you know, you're like, all of a sudden I'm like a pro-trans, like, which again, who cares about that? But like the slippery slope is, and then once anybody finds out about something that you said before and then you're kicked out of that in-group, I mean, it crushes people. I mean, you see it all the time. I mean, you see it just within high schoolers, right? These kids who are like, oh, I was bullied, I was kicked out of my group, and then they commit suicide. So it's a very powerful thing when you are in these influential groups that are, pretty toxic, right? And then somebody takes you, or the group turns on you and removes you from it. And that's why it's so powerful to find a group of people who are supportive, non-judgmental, and will hold you accountable for your own good, not because it supports the group, right? It's the tribe thing that we've talked about. Because while we do have self-reliance, right, we do have weaknesses. And that's why we have teams, and we kind of talked about that too, is teams are important because it helps your weaknesses become your strengths, or someone else can help you become stronger in that area. But also if you have a good tribe of people that you can rely on, workout partners, guys you go and hunt with, shoot guns with, all the stuff that we kind of talk about on here, who you can sit over a table and be like, hey man, you're making like all these, there's something going on in your life. Can you talk to me, bro? Like, tell me what's going on. You can hash that stuff out. The things that you avoid it's powerful. But again, that's like a toxic masculinity thing, right? You can't have a bunch of guys come out and sit in a duck blind and hang out and talk about their problems because it's, toxic masculinity.
Well, yeah, I may be perceived that way, but I trust
Yep.
that the people that I'm there with are good people and they're out for my better good, and we're doing this as a nice outing for us. I'm going to do that.
Yeah, and you've got that whole group has a moral compass, right?
Right.
And I think there was a sense of time where that was kind of warped and like, hey, yeah, we'll go to the VFW and
Like the old boys club.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Which there was bad things that came out of that, right? But I think we've kind of moved on from that. And it's like I got a group of guys who are all married dudes with kids who, like, if there's an issue, we can all talk to each other about it. Like, and I tell you right now, if one of them was like messing around with their wives, dude, they get strung up, like, because we all know each other's wives, we all care about each other's families, and you're not going to break that bond because you're stupid, right? You're just making a bad decision. You're being influenced by something that is not true, and then people still see that as like this, like, you got this group of guys and they're all successful and blah 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 blah. And, you might catch us out one night having a few drinks and kind of just being guys and having fun, but like at the same time, on the back end of that, we're going to watch out for each other and our families. So people don't see that part of it because it's good. And that's the problem, right? We need more of that. We need people to have more of that. And that's part of your tribe, to be reliable on each other and on yourselves to do those types of things.
I would argue too that the quality of that circle is far superior and more important than the quantity of it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, now it's quantity. It's the acquisition of more followers, more likes, more validation. But you would be best to find a core group of people that shares your same beliefs, has your same compass. That's a smaller group.
Yeah, and the war against that is widespread and strong, right? Social media apps are designed, they basically are designed to trigger the pleasure centers of your brain.
Right.
Right? Like, when you refresh your iPhone, you pull down from the top. They designed that because it's like a slot machine. So it elicits that same little dopamine kick every single time. And the more followers and likes you get of people you don't even know, you probably wouldn't even like them, right? That drives people to continue that behavior and to entrench themselves further in those things. And then before they know it, there's no way out.
What's interesting is that, Twitter kind of lends itself to being somewhat of a, let's be honest, it's a cesspool of negativity.
Disaster.
It just is, right?
Yeah.
The thing is that when somebody mentions, let's say 50 positive things about something that you posted about, you'll bypass all of those to read the 51st comment that was negative.
Yep.
Right? And you react to it almost as if it was somebody that you actually know, but you don't. But you have that same reaction. It's like you never see that person. You don't even know if they're real.
Yep.
But the knee-jerk reaction that you have is that it was somebody that you actually knew personally and that they slighted you. Okay, well, what about the first 50?
Yep.
Not that you should be keeping score that way, but it's like we have that tendency to look that way, and it's like it's a bad game to get into.
Yep. And then what perseverates that issue is when you do address that person, then the 49 or 50 other people will attack.
Oh,
with
yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Right. So it perpetuates that behavior of like anyone who disagrees with me, I'm coming for you, and my whole crew of Twitter followers is like, it's such a house of cards. I can't wrap my head around why people hold so much value within that. I just can't figure it out. I mean, maybe it's a consequence of just, I don't know, man. I can't. It's amazing to me, like why people invest so much of their emotions and energy and self-worth in an online presence of people that you'll never interact with ever on a daily basis personally, because you physically couldn't, and you probably actually wouldn't like those people really. And I don't know. It's very confusing to me. It's one of those things where I can't just like. All right.
Well, we're not wired to understand them.
Yeah.
We're not. It's the same way because you're reacting to a complete stranger. We don't know what the algorithm really means. Like maybe it skews more towards people that are having a really shitty week.
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, I think it's designed to, right? It's supposed to, it's designed to loop those people in and lock them in, and then it pushes things to you that you're either going to agree with or probably actually more often strongly disagree with, right? So it's basically hacking your brain to not be able to put the phone down, which is really amazing to me because the morality of that is so terrible that like people are just okay with it though. Mm-hmm. Like people don't understand how manipulated they're being at their detriment, yet nobody does anything about it, right? Again, I'm not like a government step in and break up the big tent, but it's like, who's going to be the adult and understand and go like, we're playing the biggest part in tearing our society down. Let's just keep going.
Right.
I mean, I think it speaks the volumes of money, but I think it's also more of a control thing too, right? Like you're kind of tugging at the strings of people. You can get them to do whatever you want. Like if I'm on YouTube and I'm like, I'm gonna look up this guitar video and I'm like, why is this video of Joe Biden coming up on my? All I do is I watch like guitar players on YouTube and I watch a couple medical things, but like somehow within the way that my algorithm works, I'm the staunch conservative, which I do lean a little more conservative, but I'm just like, but it's getting me to, because if I click on that thing, guess what's going to happen? I'm just going to get all this other crap to flow on that's going to keep my attention.
Yeah, and you've also just taught the algorithm to serve you more.
Exactly. Whether that's good or bad.
Right.
We're getting way off the rails.
No, but part of what's inherent in what was pretty foundational to those social media platforms was the representation of each individual's experience. Oh, look at this picture that my friend posted, or look at this post, and this is a funny tweet. It's like that's kind of where they were all started. We were interested in seeing that. We were interested in hearing that.
Yeah.
We were interested in partaking in that and pitching into that.
And seeing your friends and their experiences if they moved away. Like, oh, my buddy moved to Colorado. I don't get to see him, but I can see pictures of him in his life. That's great, right? That's not a bad thing.
Right. And in one short decade, now it's like, no, silence or you'll be ostracized, or no, if you're not a part of this group, then you won't be welcome in, or you'll be asked to leave, or you'll be canceled, whatever the case may be.
Like, I would love if they would do a social experiment on if they removed the like buttons from all social media platforms for like 3 days. What would happen? how their responses and the way that they would talk on there and the things that they would post, how they would change. Because you don't get that reinforcement of like, okay,
So
Jen 487 just like that picture. You know, like I think it would be really interesting to see what would happen. I think it would almost be like a crack withdrawal for people.
Oh yeah.
Because they wouldn't be like, no, don't give me hope, and they'd start to freak out about it.
Yeah.
Because that's their self-image is put within that. It's quite interesting. I think it'd be cool. Can you get Twitter? We can get Jack Dorsey in here. We can see if we can get a social experiment.
Yeah. So what else? What else were we talking about before? You were mentioning something about doing this with your kids.
Yeah.
How do you raise them in a way that is better than you had it, but so that they don't overlook or that they don't miss out on the chance to learn the value of extended periods of investing in yourself and investing in a particular endeavor.
Mm-hmm.
How are you balancing that as a father?
Well, I think it's tough. My kids are young.
It starts there, though.
It does, yeah. So the hardest part for me is I don't want my kids to experience what I experienced, right? And most people don't. They always think like, well, I had these issues in my life and I don't want my kids to have to suffer, right? Now, sometimes we take that too far and we're like, man, I remember that really sucked when I lost that game. So let's just give medals to everybody. There's no winners and no losers, right? That's like the coddling of the youth, which is a terrible idea. But I think they still need to experience. I mean, I think if you're in a well-functioning family that is together, there's a mom and dad, I don't really care, and there's kids within there, and you've got roles defined, and these needs are being met. You have to find ways to let them know that there's winners and losers in life, that there's struggles in life, that there's gonna be hard times, and that you as an individual have to get through those on your own. I think sports is great. I think if I had it my way, I'd have all my kids in mixed martial arts or jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
Right? I think Joe Rogan said it best, was like, there's a hammer and a nail, you're the nail for a really long time. It's not like 6 months, it's years of just getting rolled, right? But then one day you become the hammer. And then jiu-jitsu is a great example of an infinite game. You can never stop learning. But then you can never stop passing your knowledge down to the next practitioner of it. That's why you practice jiu-jitsu. It's just like medicine. They're not the same thing, but it's the same thought of like, this art's going to continue to grow, right? So I would put my kids in like a martial arts like that, where it's a competitiveness. There's in a real life application, right? You could really hurt somebody, but it's a controlled environment where there's people who will tell you when to stop. There's a notification to say, okay, I'm going to pass out, you're going to break my arm, let's stop. Okay, so there's a safety valve there. You brush up against the guardrails of failure. You're allowed to have someone say, okay, this is where you went wrong, right? If you want to avoid getting in that situation again, this is how you can not do that. And then so you teach those values to them. You grow in a community of people who are going to support you and care about you, and not just about you as a jiu-jitsu practitioner, but in your life, right? I think it's a fantastic setting for that, right? And then other activities, team sports, so on and so forth, to learn your position, your role, how to work within a team, how to build trust for your teammates within you and within each other. So that way, like, because everybody's ever been on a team has let their teammates down at some point, right? They made a mistake, and then that's almost a vomit-inducing thing if you care. Like, if you miss something and somebody scores a goal or a touchdown, like, you almost want to puke more because you let your teammates down rather than you got beat.
That's the learning.
And that is the learning thing. So you can go up to these people and say, like, I made a mistake, I messed up, I'm going to do better, I'm going to train harder so that we can win as a team, and I won't let you down, right? There's a ton of value in that, because you take that in life to in school, when you do group projects, at work, when you work with the team, right? Those things are long-term benefits where you can constantly be reminded of that time. And then I think volunteering for those who have less than what you do is vital, because you get a true picture of poverty and sadness and people who have circumstances that they can't overcome. And then you can give your time for free with nothing in expectation in return to help them. Because then you create an altruistic mentality in them to give back to those who are less fortunate, or who literally can't stand up for themselves or help themselves, right? Not a 19-year-old kid who came from an affluent family who has an identity issue, right? Those are the people who they need help, but they don't need that type of help. When you go and help someone at like a homeless shelter to feed them, to clothe them, with nothing in expectation in return, I think that's another part of it that really helps young kids. That's probably more appropriate for like 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, to see that and make that a regular part of their life, to help them get over the fact that it's not all about you and that you can give what you have to help others. So that's probably the things that I want to do with my kids is martial arts, team sports, and then volunteering to kind of help say, well, this is how you're going to learn your life of individuality, working as a team, and then you got it way better than you could ever imagine. Because I don't want to show like, how do I show my kids how to be poor, right? I don't mean for that to sound like a statement of like, well, great, but it's like, I'm going to fight tooth and nail to make sure that my kids are fed, they are clothed, they are taken care of, right? That would be a failure as me as a father and as a man for my kids to not be able to do that. So that's not going to happen, but I show them that through another way, through giving their time and energy and effort and laying their eyes on these people and talking to them and learning about them, and giving back to them.
Yeah, you're encouraging them to get out of their own two shoes and their own experience, because it isn't all about them.
No, yeah.
And as a kid, I mean, we were all started as kids. The whole world revolves around you.
Yep.
So
that's normal. That's a survival.
Right.
That's built in.
Right.
Right. And as we age, we learn out of that. If you don't teach people how to get out of that, they will never get out of it. There are people who are grown adults who can't think about anybody but themselves because they only think that their self-interest is the most important thing in the world. Even though they contribute such little back to others, they still think that them, me is the most important
I think
thing.
they call that a personality disorder. But
borderline personality or sociopath or narcissistic personality disorder. I think you could probably pick out a few of those people day by day.
Yeah. Well, I think that we've certainly done our part to illustrate, the real need and the importance of being self-reliant as an individual.
So I think a good idea. What we should do is to maybe give some either other podcast recommendations, reading recommendations to people, because again, we don't have all the answers, and you might hear this in a different way from another person, which will help you understand it and apply it better. Like, do you have any resources for people that you would recommend that guys read, listen to, research?
Yeah. I would say it depends on what you're after, but Corey Wayne would be a really good one. Jocko's very good. I don't want to steal your thunder on that. Corey Wayne's really good. He's an online coach, a life coach, peak performance coach. Let's see here. I mean, Jordan Peterson would be a prime example. I think he's probably at the top for me.
Yeah, 12 Rules of Life. I would start with that big old chunk and wrap that off slowly. Yeah.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, even that's a lot of text, and obviously, as you know, he's incredibly smart.
Yeah.
I got a lot from his lectures.
Yeah. YouTube. Yeah.
Yeah, his lectures are incredibly powerful. Even going so far as like weaving in archetypes and how they're illustrated through Disney movies and a lot of that psychoanalysis. So I would say him above even Corey for sure. Those would be the two that I can think of at least right now. I'm sure I'll think of 6 or 7 more on my way home today.
You probably could, yeah. I would recommend people read 2 books by the same author, Ryan Holiday.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Ego is the Enemy and The Obstacle is the Way.
Yep.
If you approach those books, they're short reads, they're only like 150 pages, they're tiny little books, and you can get through them in a couple days. Read them, reread them, right? If you can subdue your own ego and read those books, there is so, like, pound for pound, the amount of value in those books is incredible. It will teach you other people's failures, and the ego is the enemy. It will teach you other people's failures based off their ego, and the obstacle is the way, will teach you that the path least traveled is the best. Facing the obstacles head on, taking on the challenge head on, And he gives historical references to this, where these people didn't waver from their beliefs, and they didn't waver from their things that were good. And so it's not like people like Hitler, who, it's not anything crazy like that. It's actually like philosophers and other people who have, through their trials and tribulations, come on the other side and said, this is great, and if I didn't go through that, I wouldn't be where I am today. And it's those 2 books I'd recommend to anybody. He has a Daily Stoic podcast that you can listen to that has 5-7 minute little quick hitters.
Yeah, he's got a lot. His work is really grounded in Stoicism and
Yep. A lot of philosophy-based stuff, but not so much so that it just flies over people's heads. He does a really good job of communicating just to I'm not a philosopher, but just to the general guy who's trying to get some value out of something.
They're the same principles that apply today. The very same.
Yep. It doesn't change. Yeah. That's the amazing part about it. It just those things came from hundreds of years ago, and those are etched in stone.
Yeah.
It's quite amazing. So.
Yeah. Well, that's going to do it for us. I want to take a quick moment here to thank Adam, our AV guy, who has done a brilliant job at putting together our podcast and the video quality.
All the promos, everything. He's done all that stuff. He shoots it, he edits it, he posts. He does all the social media presence, everything for this podcast and for Limitless Mail.
Yeah, so a huge debt of gratitude to you, my man, and we wish you the best of luck going forward. So we're going to miss you, and hopefully you'll still tune in. So
he's moving to Dallas. So
yes, so maybe plant a Matt Explain flag down there. We get some viewership up. Anyway, it's not about that, but thank you for everything that you've done, and best of luck going forward. That's going to do it for us. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next one. Cheers.
Thanks for tuning into the episode, guys. We appreciate you listening. Do us a favor, if you would hit the like button below and subscribe. You can also hit the little bell. That'll send you a notification when we post a new episode. In addition, if you have any questions, concerns, or comments, shoot us an email at hosts, that's plural, HOSTS, at menexplainpodcast.com, or go check out menexplainpodcast.com. Do us a favor, just share this with anybody you think that they would like it. We appreciate you tuning in. We'll catch you next time.